three new threat actors. Why do I really care? I mean, maybe you could say the percentage of threat increased this much, but why do I really care whether it's Petrovite or any of the other ones? What does that really matter to me as an asset owner? This is very exciting. Hi, I'm Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. Before we get to my first guest here, I just wanted to remind everyone that S4 22 is April 19th through the 21st in Miami South Beach. I really think it's going to happen this time. I don't want to jinx it since it's been postponed twice, but it really looks like it's a go this time. We're very excited. We've had all this time to set it up and arrange it. Of course, it's 3 days on 3 stages, so the sessions themselves are great. But I'm probably most excited about just getting the chance to see the community again. We pushed over 500 now. We're in the 500 plus ticket range now. Amazing people, best in world. We've got a lot of fun set up for you. So if you don't already have your ticket, consider it. Go to s4xevents.com. You can see it all there. If you have any questions, email at s4@digitalbond.com. Now let me bring on my guest. My guest this week is Sergio Caltagirone. He actually began his career as a threat intelligence analyst at NSA and then moved to the private industry as director of threat intel at Microsoft. He joined Dragos in 2017, and he's currently the VP of threat intel at Dragos. And Sergio, maybe the most impressive thing I found about you in terms of bio is the Threat Intelligence Academy, where you teach a course, describes you as the godfather of threat intelligence. So welcome, Godfather, to the Unsolicited Response Show.
Hey, thank you, Dale. I think with the last name like mine, I think it's an odd fitting title that some have given me. But I also have to follow up with your intro. S4 is an amazing event, by the way. All props and credit, to you for such an amazing event for the community for so many years that you've been doing it. I can imagine the endurance, especially during the pandemic, of having to go through it and keep it up. So anyway, just thank you to you from the community for what you've done to maintain that.
You're welcome. And I'm looking forward to seeing the Dragos crew there too, because I know you guys sent quite a few.
We're excited.
Well, let's dive in here. First of all, I want to say that, we're going to talk about threat intel and specifically ICS OT threat intel. I think it's important, Dirty Harry always said a man needs to know his limitations. And threat intel is a whole field of study on its own. It's not something that it's almost like a security professional has to be careful that they don't pretend to understand engineering unless they're an engineer. Right. I sort of get the same feeling with threat intel, although it's maybe a field of study in security, but it's something itself. And I'm less interested in necessarily becoming an expert in threat intel or understanding what goes on in threat intel. Hold on, I just lost you there. There we go. I'm more interested in kind of the interface of a consumer of threat intel, because most of my listeners are asset owners or people involved in protecting control systems. Yes. And they typically will get threat intel in, or maybe they don't yet and are considering what they need in threat intel. So I think that's the focus I'd like to have here. Maybe as a start, from that perspective, from a consumer perspective, what is good threat intelligence and what factors make it good?
Oh man, what a question. So, early in my career, like a lot of threat intel people, I was fascinated with the technical, how do packets and data, early in my career, I was also involved in serial communications, in satellite communications. We talk about packets all the time, but it's more than there's more than electrons. We also have the entire range of RF signals, that stuff can go over, and then of course getting involved in then the threats to those environments, and so I think threat intelligence by itself, understanding, finding, hunting, and understanding cyber threats, right? What bad people are doing, is, you know, a really new area of study. I mean, we kind of trace ourselves back to 1986. If your listeners haven't read The Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stoll, please read it. It is just a fun book to read. You know, you don't have to be an expert in anything. It's just a lot of fun. I think most of us trace the origins of our field back to that, to 1986. Obviously, there were hackers prior to 1986, but you know, my graduate level, my graduate advisor, Deb Frinke. So she ended up being director of R&D over at our NSA. She was at Oak Ridge. She was director of research at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. She was over at INL. She's been all over the place, right? And when I got involved with her and I started like tracking and studying hackers like as a field of study in my graduate career, you know, she told me, she's like, Sergio, this nobody cares about this. You know, this isn't engineering models. These aren't formal proofs of cybersecurity or integrity or availability or, you know, models of confidentiality. You know, this is kind of like the dark horse of cybersecurity. Like nobody takes it seriously. And until, you know, I would say until the mid 2000s, that's kind of how it was treated. Nobody really cared, you know, because everyone thought, well, if I can build a secure system, then I don't have to worry so much about hackers. It's all about those unsecured systems, whatever that meant, that we had to really care about. And then we started realizing very quickly that security is really in the eye of the beholder. And it's actually more in the eye of the adversary than it is the eye of the operator that matters. And so, you know, you can have an operator, quote unquote, secure system, but an adversary could not consider that a secure system easily. So at that point, what does secure mean? Is whose perspective does it really matter? But that didn't, I mean, in security, that change of philosophy didn't occur until like the mid 2000s. And so, you know, what we're stuck with is now a brand new field effectively of study of how do we track, understand, and then describe effectively to operators, whether those are network operators, engineers, plant owners and operators, you know, all that kind of term of operator, how these things, how they're being attacked, why they're being attacked, who's attacking them, and then what they can potentially do about it. And I think the challenge here is that one of the reasons why you say it's a profession and is that it, just like engineering, there is a very significant amount of study and discipline you have to go through. I mean, it's kind of like, if you want to call it, like I even call it on my team, like threat engineers almost. Like their entire job is to understand it like an engineering principle, like through engineering principles. Because you, like any other discipline, profession, you have to break yourself. You have to, one, understand what the principles are of the domain. What are systems? How do they get broken? Why do they get broken? What happens after they get broken? What does a response look like? But then you also have to understand your own biases. And just like an engineer can build a system, but there are systems, especially in professional engineering, there are systems of checks and balances to help prevent engineers from making obvious mistakes. You know, things that even professional engineers make, right? And just in intelligence, we have the exact same kind of function. We have not only the process of developing intelligence and understanding, but we also have a process around how we don't tell people bad stuff. You know, if I was to go to an owner and operator that's going to spend $20 million in OT cybersecurity next year, I don't want to tell them the wrong thing. You know, I mean, we all have finite resources, and we don't want to go, you know, we don't want to send people down the wrong paths. That's then we just make the world worse to some extent. We waste, you know, critical resources. So from that perspective, that's kind of the perspective of, you know, when I talk to people who are like, okay, Sergio, what is intelligence? How do I consume it properly? I try to get them to first understand, okay, the first thing you need to understand is that this is like engineering. Our job is to understand the world in a way that it exists, is then to try to operationalize it, which is now what do you do with that information? But then we also have key processes to prevent bad things, bad information from flowing to people who want to trust us. And the fundamental principle here is, Dale, good intelligence is useless intelligence if it's left unused. So as you say, what is good intelligence? I tell people the best intelligence is the intelligence you can trust and you use. If you just go out and buy or collect intelligence because it makes you feel good, I got to tell you, that's the worst thing you could do. There's no value in doing that. You've got to use intelligence for it to be of any value to you. And so that is fundamentally the best intelligence is that which you use.
Okay. It's funny. Before I get to my next question, I didn't realize you and I actually have something in common beyond the fact that we started at NSA. I think when we both started, we were working at NSAs in careers that were probably viewed as dead ends. No commercial applicability.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad told me when I went to be a crypto analyst there, he said, it might be really cool, but you're not going to be able to get any other job anytime. And we just both lucked out that the world came to us. It's kind of funny.
I think it's hilarious. I started, and I can say, of course, just like you, parts of my job there are unclassified. Sure. I started there as a digital network analyst, right? So my job was to understand global networks and how you could, attack them theoretically, how you could read network traffic from around the world to gather intelligence. And some of the major areas I was involved in were dead end areas. Like they were just the most boring things you could ever think of working on. But that's how I cut my teeth, and then this thing started, and it was me and two other guys. And I apologize. It was me and Brian, and then it was Maureen Hunter. And we were the only ones really tracking adversaries for a while. Just hanging out, doing fun stuff. So, yeah.
Well, it's always nice when the world comes to you. Every once in a while, the little luck helps out. But going back to what we were talking about, I saw you did a webinar in 2019, I think October 2019, my notes say, and you said threat intel should do two things. One of them made a lot of sense for me, reducing adversary dwell time. Yes. So this threat intel would allow me to say, this is what the attackers are doing. Let me do threat hunting or something else to detect an attack sooner. So rather than sitting in there for 6 months, 9 months, a year, maybe I can cut it down to 3 months or a week, obviously shorter is better. So that one I understand because you tell me this is what the attacker is doing. This is what to look at. The other one I didn't understand as much. It said threat intel should also reduce harm by reducing operational mean time to recovery.
Yeah.
So how would threat intel help me reduce my mean time from recovery from an attack?
Wonderful question, Dale. So that is, what we call we in my world, and I don't like to use this in the OT space very often, but in the intelligence world, we call that the point of boom, right? And it has obviously very negative connotations in the OT space, but what we call is left of boom and right of boom, right? Yep. And that comes from the traditional military approaches of intelligence. So left of boom, right, the stuff that happens before bad things happen, that is, of course, reducing dwell time, right? Making sure that the adversary isn't there as long, isn't there very long or long enough that they could actually do something super harmful. It's about again, all this is about reducing harm, not erasing harm. Now, then you have right of boom. So after bad things happen to you, what can you do? Now, the thing is what I learned, a lot of this actually I learned at Microsoft was, and this was coming out of, a company that was dealing with millions of malicious events an hour almost. And so we were trying to really figure out as my old boss, John Lambert, used to say, what are the physics of cybersecurity, right? What are the things you can measure and control that actually have impact on a system? Okay. And so we called that, the physics of the space. And so on the right side of boom, so after bad things happen, one of the questions I have a lot of operators ask me is, well, are they still here? If they're still here, can I bring the system back up safely and reliably? if they're still there, you may need to rethink how you now mitigate what has happened, what your response might be. It might have to be longer than you anticipated. You may not be able to bring a system back on safely. You may have to introduce other safety controls, such as larger areas. In OT, we could say things like larger evacuation zones, right? If, say, really bad things were to occur, right? If we didn't think we could bring it online to a certain level of safety, right? We may have to bring it online to a reduced level of safety, depending on the situation. And so, from that perspective, and again, these are using the worst case scenarios to make an obvious point, is that the idea is that, okay, so bad thing happened to you. The question comes down into same in medical triage. What is the best immediate response you can make given the threat of the environment? So a good example in the medical space that most people might recognize, right, is if you get impaled by an object, right, you shouldn't take that object out until you reach somewhere that can help you, right? And that's the same thing, is that, okay, if a plant goes down, if a process comes offline, the question is, what happened? Well, it's same in medical. Well, if you were impaled, there's a better way to handle the problem, right? And so it's the same thing in if you want to call it systems operations, right? If a specific bad thing happened to you, you may not want to take certain actions that you thought were the right thing to do, right? Which is pull that thing out. Okay, so.
Well, I think that makes, so I understand what you're saying now. And if I were to boil down what you just told me, what I heard was threat intel can help me determine what the attacker did and if they're still there.
And what they did to other people, right? And that's one of the benefits of this, is we can say, oh, well, what happened to you happened to this other person. And because of that, you can learn from their recovery to see what happened, what worked and what didn't work.
I see. So then that would be where you start to pull in information. Yeah, which I guess would be threat intel information from other people suffering the same sorts of things. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, let's move on now, because I've got a lot of questions for you. Since this isn't my area of expertise. One of the things that I struggle with is companies like yours, like Dragos and Mandiant and CrowdStrike and others, give these threat actors names. APT1, APT41. In the case of Dragos, Petrovite, Erythracite. I must admit, I'm not a huge fan of your naming convention, I'm sure that's a personal thing. Some people probably love it, some don't. To me, it's very confusing. But so you give them names, but I guess from an asset owner perspective, when sometimes you tell me, oh, there's 4 new, like in your recent report that you put out, your 2021 report, I think there were 4 new threat actors.
There were 3, yes.
3? Okay, sorry. 3 new threat actors. Why do I really care? I mean, maybe you could say the percentage of threat increased this much, but why do I really care whether it's Petrovite or any of the other ones? What does that really matter to me as an asset owner?
Dang, Dale, that is a great question, actually. I love that, because it gets to the heart of what is a big misunderstanding. Which is that, first of all, I think a big misunderstanding comes from those names are used publicly by the press a lot of times. Now we use those labels, of course, publicly, but they get magnified by the press. So it seems almost like a brand name. And that's how people feel about them. And so there's some negative connotation around, well, why are you giving these bad things brand names? And does it really matter? Are you just making names up to make yourself, whatever? And that's a completely reasonable and very valid question that you and others should be asking. Because that is a very bad thing for the industry to do. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't happen with all companies, but I can tell you that the reason we give them names, us, and I can speak for Mandiant, I can speak for CrowdStrike, I can speak for Microsoft, and I started Microsoft's naming as well, right? Unfortunately, I gave them the element periodic table of the element, which means I couldn't use it at Dragos, so we had to come up with a different naming scheme. Anyway, so there's all of that fun and games about naming, but the reason is again, it gets back to, we have finite resources. If you have $10-20 million to spend in cybersecurity, what should you do? You can't do everything. We don't have resources to hire everybody, to buy everything, to do everything we need to make our systems as secure as I think we all wish they were. So we have to find a cutoff of what's good enough. Finding that out is really hard. It comes to liability, it comes to operations, it comes to business continuity. There's a whole bunch of questions that come into how good is good enough. And the answer is that the reason we give them names, there's two things that I want somebody to understand from this. One, naming is extremely powerful. So I also have a degree in theology, strangely, right? So a lot of people used to joke, are you writing religious software? When I got dual degrees in computer science and theology. Anyway, but from just a really quick note, from theology, we understand how powerful names are. Many religions in the world aren't allowed to speak the name of their God, for instance, because of how powerful that is. Naming throughout human history is extremely powerful. People associate personal connections to names that you read and things like that. So first of all, naming is a very important aspect of what we do, but we have to be very careful with how we use it. The reason we give them names is, one, so that they are easily recognizable. That's it. It's a label. And that's all there really is to it. But the reason it's so important to label these things and to keep them separate is because if you protect against Petrovite different than you would protect against, say, xenotime. But if you are in a particular vertical, say oil and gas, and you're like, hey, I have $10 million to spend, what should I protect against? You probably shouldn't spend your money on Petrovite. You should probably spend your money on xenotime. Now, what do I mean by that when I say spend your money on xenotime? What the heck does that even mean? What it means is that there is a small set of security mitigations that you can put in place to drastically reduce the harm that xenotime could have in your environment. Now, of course, Petrovite has a different set because they operate very differently. Now, if you wanted to do both, you would have to then do a union of those two sets. To say, okay, now I have all of these actions to take if I wanted to protect myself against these two things. So the reason we give them names is, one, to make them easily recognizable and differentiated amongst each other. And two, it's to basically just gather how these two things operate, or multiple things operate, so that we can make better security decisions as to, hey, I don't need to protect against this, but I need to protect against this. So this type of threat, whether it's xenotime or something like it, I know that I can take these 5 actions and I've done something positive to reduce harm with that adversary. And it's the same thing with Microsoft. It's the same thing with others. It's simply it is a good tool if people use it properly, again, to effectively challenge what they should be doing and where they should be spending their resources.
Okay, so this is good because that leads right into my next question. And this is actually one of the challenges I have with CISA and other guideline documents is they tend to say this thing is happening, and then they give you a long list of goodness and motherhood and cyber hygiene and other things. And I noted, like, in your annual report, and this might be a question of who this annual report is really geared at, but in your annual report, you had 4 primary recommendations. Good security perimeter, I think 2-factor remote access, visibility, and separate the various Active Directories or user managements between IT and OT. Don't share them.
Correct.
I would say, with the exception of visibility, those are probably the same things that almost any assessment report from 2010 on by an ICS security professional had. And that would be independent. If it was any one of those groups, you would say, yeah, of course, that is almost irrespective of the threat. Those are the things that would reduce risk, because you'd say, how would someone most likely get in and do damage? Well, they'd get in because you don't have a perimeter. They'd get in because you're using static username and passwords. They get in because they're on your corporate network and you're sharing AD. I guess visibility is kind of the odd duck. That's more, more detection, asset management related.
Correct.
So is it just the fact that the threat intel in the annual report is this gathering? And if you were to really get actionable threat intel on a specific threat actor, it would not have that motherhood and goodness. It would be saying, you need to hunt for this. You need to put this specific control in place.
Absolutely. That is exactly right. So because the year in review is literally a year in review, we pull everything together. And the question we ask is, what are the three, and we try to limit it to a few. What are the 3 to 4 things that we've seen both in our incident response as well as in how the threat actors are operating that would really help to mitigate what is going on this last year? You, though, make a great point, and one that I am going to actually agree with you on, that there are including attacking our own analysis, which I'm happy to do when it's accurate, right? Which is, we spend too much time reiterating the top 20 security controls. So I agree with you. I agree our report does it. I agree others do it. And I agree that what you mentioned is a completely valid criticism. The challenge I have, though, and it's the reality of the situation, that, for instance, in 100% of our food and beverage engagements during the last year, we found 100% of the time they were remotely accessible via the internet. So I completely accept and I support, and I will reach to the moon, and I tell my analysts all the time, no, you can't just keep going back to the top 20 security controls. Everyone needs to be implementing the top 20 security controls. But in the reality of the situation, Dale, is that I still have 100% in food and beverage still making the same mistake over and over. And so, we're stuck in the middle is the challenge in this, right? That your criticism is accurate and we got to get out of it. But I also have the reality of the situation is that we are so far away from getting out of that using our voice to continue to even drive the basics does more good than giving people more specific direction in that space, because that fundamentally actually won't be as good as just even giving the top 20 right now. And that's so I'm right with you on there, man. Like, we're right stuck in between those worlds.
Well, that might then indicate who those reports are for, the year-end reports, because for me, I always read them and I get something out. Like I liked, you had your 4%. I think there was a stat like 4% of the patches were actually needed to be actionable in the near term, as opposed to 96% that really aren't going to move the risk needle that much. So I think there's some of that. And I will give you credit that you restricted it to 4. I think it becomes even less valuable, even to your food and beverage customers, if you say, for example, here's 20 things to do. Because it's like, you almost throw up your hands. I can't do 20. Give me a prioritized list. So I'll give some credit there. Well, maybe one other thing on the report that I had a question on.
Please.
You talked about ransomware hitting manufacturing.
Yes.
Much heavier.
Yeah.
But I wondered a little bit, and this is where you can get into statistical bias, not necessarily human bias, but are the number, like if you were to compare manufacturing to mining, there is a huge, 10x time of number of manufacturers to mining operations.
Agreed.
So you could say we had, 10 times more manufacturing than mining, and you could actually have the same penetration. Did you see that as much of an issue in that manufacturing stat, or did you actually see, from your analysis, that no, manufacturing actually was hit 2x, 3x higher than the other sectors?
That is a great question. And this gets back to why understanding threat intelligence is so critical. Statistics, as you say, can be made to tell any story they want. Sure. And the question you ask is absolutely pertinent. So this is a great example of intelligence, which is, so the source of that intelligence, so that we're clear, so that you understand where the potential bias in those statistics lie, is that we are getting those statistics directly from the ransomware operators. So we are literally watching their operations, and we're able to tell exactly who they're going up against and what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So those statistics are raw data directly from their operations.
Mm-hmm.
So in those cases, we are giving you literally what is going on inside all these criminal networks. And so from our perspective, we feel like, yes, I got this question yesterday during my webinar. And somebody asked me, well, why, can we break out manufacturing even further? Like, we could do metals manufacturing, and we could do, we just so many different subtypes, of course, of manufacturing that you can break it out into.
And you did that in the report. I saw that you broke down into about 15 different types of manufacturers.
Yeah. So the answer is if you want to then take the percentage and then go per capita, then the answer is you say, well, who's the most damage being done to, right? If you're like, well, if 10 attacks against 20 mining companies versus 100 attacks against 10,000 manufacturers is a very different number, right? I think you're right that we could do that. In fact, I'm going to take that back for next year, because I think that's a fascinating statistic if we could break it down into, well, who actually got the most damage theoretically out of it. But of course, you can also count like total cost too, where in that case, manufacturing by far, just in the amount of ransoms and the amount of ransoms that we've added up between the industries, manufacturing has way blown out of the water everybody else's payments in ransom. So in that case, they have also borne the brunt of the total cost of ransomware. So
yeah, but again, I would try to, it's almost like you have these different size circles, and you'd almost say, well, manufacturing, the revenue in manufacturing, let's say the total market revenue is 20x times mining. Well, then the cost should be 20x or the impact. It's funny. I've had this issue a lot of times, and there's always, I think it's just more recognizing the bias either in the collection or in the population. And we saw, there was a database early on that was probably the best database on OT security incidents, but from time to time they would become more active and less active because it was volunteer. And one year they went to like 3 water conferences, and then the statistics of incidents in the water sector exploded because they were talking to a lot more of the water sector.
Yes.
And I would imagine you might even have that with some of your, like your neighborhood keeper stuff and something like that. You're getting this data in.
Yeah. And what we call that's called selection. I mean, fundamentally, that's called selection bias. Obviously, in intelligence, we call that visibility bias. You can only see what you see, and you can't prove or disprove anything outside that collection. Like, yes, it is completely valid to attack the statistics underneath it. Completely reasonable, but the challenge is that you can't prove or disprove alternate facts against it because you just don't have the data. So those are legitimate questions.
Yeah, and I would think it would need to be captured in the reports. Sort of good threat intel would put these parameters as this is what we don't know and that sort of thing. Let's talk a little bit about practically. Let's say that you're looking at someone who's doing a good job. So someone that is bringing in threat intel that's fairly mature and is doing a good job. I'm trying to understand the overlap between the people responsible for securing the systems, which is primarily my audience, and the threat intel. Is there a threat intel person on the team? Is there interface? I'm sure there's a variety but what is one or two of the, I guess, the structures and the way they communicate? What is one or two examples of a successful way to do it?
Great question. Yeah. So let me pull out 2 things. One is oil and gas is a good example. Not all oil and gas. Oil and gas is also gigantic. So you got to be careful about what you call oil and gas in general. But mostly we're talking about refining and processing here. So let me just say that I'm going to limit it to what I've seen effective in refining and processing. Has been that there will be both in a traditional cybersecurity team, we'll call that IT SOC or security operations or whatever you want to call it. But then you'll also have OT security operations.
Mhm.
And those teams will just work together. And they will both get the same visibility. They will both, from the outside, right? They'll both receive the same intel, and they'll work on it together. That is probably the best model I've seen. I see that working in, like I said, processing, refining, and oil. I see that happening in electric generation. Basically, of course, where most of the, I mean, if I can be honest, it's where most of the money is. I see
Mhm.
that type of model work. Okay, so now let's say now let me go to a broader model that gets used by most people in like the mid investment range, where you
Okay.
can't have two fully dedicated, fully funded teams.
Mhm.
Um, so generally in those cases, and I had one just this last week actually that a customer I was working with, their IT side, which is the most mature in intelligence, was receiving all the intelligence.
Okay.
Now, what they did is then they parsed it as much as they could, and this took a long time to look for them to learn. So it took a couple of years of maturing to get them here. They learned what the OT side needed to understand, and what mattered to them, and a lot of that was trial and error, and a lot of it was honestly, if I could be, kind of uh, maybe pedantic about it, a lot of it was just forgiveness. Like, okay, sometimes this team's going to talk to me and they're not going to know what they're talking about, and it's
Mhm.
forgiving them. Like, okay, we got to teach them. We have to help them understand what's going on here, right? And what actually just happened this last week, I got a note from a customer that said, "Hey, so we were getting all these intel reports from you, and what we did was I sent." Just some snippets. I just copied and pasted some stuff out for the engineers that were building a brand new plant, and they actually came back to me and asked for the whole report because they wanted to see everything that was going on,
Mm.
so that they could take it better and all of the intelligence better into account, not everything, but just on that one particular thread, into
Mhm.
account into what they were trying to engineer and the ways they needed to think about risk mitigation in those environments.
Mhm.
And that is probably the most common mature, if you want to call it mature, method of intelligence sharing between people who understand intelligence and engineers and operators who are trying to build, manage, and operate these environments. Is, eventually after a year or two, people will understand how to talk to each other. And we've talked about the IT/OT divide to no end,
Yeah.
right? So I think we can kind of leave that on the table and be like, yeah, okay, it's still a problem in some places, it's getting better in others. And but I mean, overall, it's getting better. I think we can all agree, like in most of the places I'm talking to, we're seeing dramatic improvements in IT/OT communication.
Well,
Um,
it's funny though, just a note on that. I think, we talk about biases and this would be a visibility bias. I think you and I might suffer from the same visibility bias. I'm always aware of this, is that the people that are talking to me or hiring Dragos or even considering to hire Dragos are probably the leading edge, right? They're the people that the people that at
yeah,
least care enough to have the conversation about security.
that is
So
correct.
whether that's the top, I used to say that the leading edge 10%, maybe now it's a third or a half, but so I think I'd agree with you. The people that are engaged in this are making progress on that issue.
Yeah.
But it's like once or twice a year, I work with someone who is just starting down their security journey, and they're back like 10 years ago, so it really is where they are in their security journey. But I think you're right. By the time someone's talking to you or talking to us, they've at least begun to work through that ITOT, strict separation, and they're beginning to talk, they're getting better and such.
Yeah.
Maybe though, just to point the question a little bit more to you, if I'm an asset owner and I'm
Mhm.
saying, okay, I buy in that understanding and receiving threat intel will help me reduce the dwell time, the time the attacker's in, and help me recover better
Mhm.
if an attack succeeds. What do I need? And this kind of gets to the maturity. What do I need internally to be able to do that? Do I need a individual who is responsible for threat intel? Do I need a threat hunting team? What do I need to begin to make use of this? Because again, if it doesn't lead to effective action, I saw that in your cart
Yep.
description. If it
Yep.
doesn't lead to effective action, you're just You're just making yourself feel good and spending money.
Absolutely. It's useless. I tell people, if you're not going to use Intel, don't buy it. Like there's no point in spending money. You got other, spend it on MFA or something that'll actually do something for you at that
or
point,
donuts or something.
Yeah, or whatever. Like make your people feel better. I don't know. Security people are treated terribly in many ways. So try to make your people feel a little better. So let me start with CART there, right? Which is CART, complete, accurate, relevant, and timely. People ask me all the time, well, Sergio, what's the most important part of that, right? And my answer to them is very simple. It's relevant. Like, I don't care if so there was let me put an example. There was a terrible news article that came out this last week that my team spent too many hours trying to figure out what was going on. And we ended up getting the raw data from another partner. And we were like, why would anyone write even a news article on this? But my customers were just clamoring because they saw this in the news, right? At us going like, can you tell us what's going on? Should I worry about this? All this stuff. Mm-hmm. And after we got the raw data, we were like, why would anyone write a news article on this? But it comes down to what is the most important element of intelligence? It's relevance. It doesn't matter whether the article is accurate or not, because if it's relevant, people will read it. They will pay attention. Yeah. And so in intelligence, it's all about, first of all, making it relevant to the right audience. The second of all, it's about then accuracy. You got to say accurate things. You got to be accurate what you're saying, because it doesn't matter whether you're timely or complete after that, right? And then the next thing I like to say is it's timely. It's got to be fast enough to have done something with it. And then the last thing is complete. Hopefully the intelligence is complete enough to make full use of what you can do. And so like those are the kind of the rankings I put in it. Now, how does that apply to what you just said, which is, do people need a dedicated person? Right. The answer is no, they don't. They need an intelligence function. They don't need an intelligence person. If your security operations team, if your CISO, if your engineering manager can quickly and easily get the relevant intelligence, and that you trust the team that's delivering it to give you accurate intelligence, then you don't need somebody sitting in the middle. But most of the time, people don't have the time or the patience or the resources to do the research necessary to be like, okay, who should I be listening to? What should they be giving me? And how can I then get this into the right places? That's where you need a person. Because again, more stuff, I won't curse on your podcast, more stuff in your inbox is not make you a more secure organization. So me sending you more emails doesn't matter how good it is. So if those are when you need those, that's when I would say, yes, you need to invest in a person. If you can't understand, or if you can't pick out what's relevant, understand it, and then get it into the right hands to make it useful, then you need a person. But if you have a function in your company that can do that, then you should then go ahead and you don't need to spend the money on another person.
Are you seeing most people bring this in to a person or a function that is responsible for threat intel, cyber threat intel for the entire organization, and then spread it out as needed? Or are you seeing it more your feeds going into an OT threat intel person?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we saw it originally with IT only. And the reason for that was because IT was the one being preached at for threat intel for years. Okay. Right? For a decade, they were being sold threat intel. So they were the most mature to pick it up immediately. But the number of OT teams that now I get involved with, and again, you got to take, again, like you said, selection bias into account here. But yeah, I can tell you that it is growing. Okay, so of all factors, I can know the number is growing. That the number of OT teams that are asking for access to the intelligence is growing. And then two, actually picking things out directly without the IT team doing this, passing back and forth is growing really dramatically. And in fact, what I'm seeing now more, which really is even cooler, showing you how the maturity levels are kind of, everything's kind of clicking up slowly, is now I'm seeing sub-OT teams, not just OT, but of course, a lot of these bigger companies will have multiple operational elements, right? I mean, heck, oil and gas refiners will also have transmission stations they'll be responsible for. Yep. So they'll do electric transmission as well as OT refining or oil refining. So now what we're getting involved in is we're actually now servicing multiple OT teams within organizations, each with their own specific area of expertise. So I got to say, it's really fascinating because I was not expecting that, honestly, like nearly this fast. But I'm now like a lot, actually. I'm starting to see multiple OT teams getting involved. So I'm really happy with how things are going.
Okay, I want to try to squeeze two more questions in here. This has really been great. I appreciate the learning I'm getting here. One of the other areas that I always worry about with threat intel is, when we look at risk, likelihood times consequence.
Correct.
And likelihood is the biggest problem with security, right? Because not only, unlike, especially when you talk to people from the engineering world where they can calculate mean time between failures. They have a lot of statistics. They can do this. Likelihood, first of all, we don't have the data.
Right.
And we're getting more data, but still, I think most people would say the amount of data we have isn't what we want.
I agree.
Of course, you'd always say that. You always want more data, but
I've never met an analyst that tells me they don't want more data. So.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing is that you're dealing with human motivations as opposed to physics. So someone likelihood can change like that if all of a sudden a new target, someone gets paid to do it, someone geopolitically decides to do it. So when you're doing threat intel, you're talking about incidents and things that happen, but as a consumer of that threat intel, I really want to know, well, how likely is this really to me? Is this going to happen? Is this, once in 1,000 year kind of thing? How do you deal with threat intel with projecting likelihood to your customers?
Dang, I like that. God, this is one of the best podcasts, man. You've dug into some great questions. So, I get this question a lot, and let me tell you a funny thing I never thought I'd ever say in my life. Spending time with lawyers and like chief risk officers is like some of the most engaging times I spend with companies. Because one of the questions like this, right, are really, really deep. And they get to the real heart of why are we doing what we do? How much should we do? What's good enough? Of course, they get into liability and, a lot of regulation and a lot of other funky things that apply to all of these questions. But you're right. MTF, right? Mean time to failure in physical engineering, in physics, it's understood. It's testable is the cool part. Cybersecurity is not testable. That's the thing that's difficult about it. Are we trying to make it testable? Yes. Are we getting there? Not anytime soon. So I think that's the first challenge we have. It's not testable. So we're not going to get to the answer you want just yet. But I can tell you that what we have been able to do is that the first thing you have to do is that we are so new at this game is we've been able to take the likelihood from completely unknown to above zero. So now at least we know that we are in a realm of risk. That is, first of all, an important thing to know, that you have risk. Okay, so that's what we got to understand first.
Sure.
Now you're asked the question is, what quantify the risk for me? So to get to that, we need so much more data. But let me tell you what we can do to help with that. It's that, as you mentioned, and you mentioned a great point, that a lot of these engineered environments are engineered for accepted, understood risk. Right? We know a pump will fail every so often. We know what required maintenance look like, but we don't know what as you said, the human element is. A lot of these environments are not designed to operate in what we call in security, an adversarial environment, right? It's not designed for an insider to start pulling cables and, turning things off. It's designed for generally elemental failure. So the issue we get to then is, what we're trying to do in this year in review report is to get some data out so that we can build on it year over year to start building these questions. How many threat groups do we see attacking oil and gas? Well, I can tell you it went from 0 that we knew of. It went to 2 in the first year. It went to 4 in the next year, and it just added 2 more. So I can tell you that the risk profile is increasing. Now, can I tell you to a specific like oil and gas refining plant? No, I can't right now. But I can tell you that overall the environment is changing across these different industries in different ways. Food and beverage is getting hit far more than we've ever seen before. So we know that the likelihood is going up. We don't know what the likelihood in a specific case is, but we do know the general likelihood is increasing. So that is where intelligence is helping to at least get us closer to a question or closer to an answer.
Yeah, and I think you're right in the sense that simply providing examples of the threat, the actual realized threat, I guess.
Not the hypotheticals. We don't need to worry about hypotheticals anymore. We're way beyond hypotheticals.
Yeah, and there is still, it's almost like the discussion I have all the time with Joe Weiss, where I tell him, we know level 0 is insecure and unauthenticated. And he brings up the valid point. Well, and the community knows, but there's still all these people that don't know. And I think that's also true in what you're saying. The community knows the threat is real, but there's a lot of executives that still don't understand it. There's probably other people that don't understand it. Let's go into the last question I want to ask is a little bit different. And this was, you had a post, I would say within the last month, on a new publication that you're related to in some way, the Journal of Threat Intelligence and Incident Response.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting was, there's always new publications coming out, but you had a little salty words in your post that kind of said you weren't happy with what was out there. And this is why it was. You said, quote, "What's different is we don't care about the academic qualification or thought pieces. We want real lessons from practitioners that deliver value to others so that we can rapidly grow the expertise in these fields, but at the same time, peer-reviewed to ensure the highest quality."
Right.
So there was some gap out there that you're trying to fill? Maybe explain what you saw the gap and what you're trying to fill.
Yeah, there's two things. One is conferences. Conferences are great. S4 is great. I love it. I go to conferences. I support conferences. The problem with conferences, and you know this, Dale, conferences are a flash in the pan, right? As soon as one conference is done, and you know this, at the very end of the conference, what do? You plug next year's conference, right? People are already gone, right, mentally. And I'm not saying that anyone's doing anything wrong, but this is literally just how conferences work. Yeah. And hopefully people post videos. They will write blog posts about their conference presentation. I try to write a blog post about my conference presentations. I try to help make it archival, right? At least a little bit. But that happens way too much. Most of the people in this industry, all they do is speak at conferences. It never gets archived, never gets saved. The 300 people that are there are the only ones that ever get to hear it. So first of all, we got to fix that problem. The second thing is that, and the amount of money people spend on conferences means we got to do better, because we can spend that investment more effectively to improve our communities. The second thing is just the gatekeeping that happens in the academic world around actual archival peer-reviewed work. The fact is that, I got to go to graduate school. Most of the people I work with, most of them never went to grad school. Very few of them actually went to undergrad. A lot of them went through the military with a high school degree. They're now experts in their field. They were never exposed to anything like journals or why they exist or what the important function is. And when you submit to a journal, in many cases, you have to submit your academic qualifications to those journals, which gatekeeps it even further. And so the fact is, I'm trying to make it more accessible to who is really in our community, to the underrepresented people who never were exposed or supported in traditional educational environments. And so I think that we're missing out a gigantic gap of experts that we could be drawing on, that I want to help improve.
Okay. Well, we'll include a link to that.
Thank you.
For people that are interested. And we'll also include links to the 2021 report, as well as the webcast that you did yesterday, along with a couple of your colleagues on the 2021 report, for those that want to see it. If you're interested in actually diving deep into threat intel, there is the Threat Intelligence Academy. I assume you're still teaching your course there?
I do. And it's entirely recorded. It is 60 plus hours. And so it is not for the faint of heart. If you want to understand intel soup to nuts, it is the course to take. So.
Okay. Okay, we do that. And what's the best way if someone wants to follow you, what you put out, or interact with you? Are you more active on Twitter, LinkedIn? Where do people find you?
Mostly Twitter, but I try to. I find the LinkedIn audience a little bit nicer, but so I go back and forth. But Twitter and LinkedIn are both places. But Twitter mostly is where I talk just extemporaneously. So
Okay. At CNO Analysis is his
it
Twitter
is.
handle for those of you listening instead of watching. Well, Sergio, I really appreciate you being on the podcast and helping answer some long-held questions I had on threat intel. And we'll be watching the various product that you guys make public.
Dale, this was actually a lot of fun. I really appreciate it, and a huge credit to you. Those were amazingly good questions. I really appreciate it.